The first time Eli Turner heard the school bell, it wasn't rung by a hand or pulled by a rope. It groaned through the bones of the building and into his own, a rusted sound that felt like a warning or an invitation. The prairie wind had crawled under the warped clapboards of the abandoned schoolhouse and found the throat of its old iron bell. One dry gust, one hollow note, then silence, thick as burlap. Eli stood in the doorway with mud on his boots and doubt in his chest. A bill of sale folded into his pocket like a secret he didn't know how to keep. 10 cents. 10 cents for a ruin at the edge of town, a place even crows avoided. The whole thing felt like a dare. He smelled mouse droppings and chalk dust and something else older, a sourness baked into the wood like wet books that had dried wrong. Beneath it lay the faint, stubborn sweetness of oiled desks and lemon soap, the kind teachers used to scrub their hands raw. He pictured rows of children once sitting straight, the scuff of shoes on pine boards, the sting of winter air when the stove died. The past hovered in the room the way heat does above a road, wavy, uncertain but undeniable. Patch, his blue heeler, slipped past his leg and sniffed, nails ticking on the floor. A draft pressed cool against Eli's wrists. Outside, thunder stitched itself along the western horizon. He'd come to pry loose the sagging roof, to salvage lumber for a new chicken coop, to turn rot into usefulness because that's what poor farmers do when the bank letters arrive with the kind of tone that ends sleep. But standing here with the bell's old note still clinging to him, he felt something else. A tug, like there was a job he hadn't been told about. The chalkboard still held a faint ghost of writing, pale math that would not let go, long division in a scrawl that looked like a goodbye. On the teacher's desk, a cracked inkwell glinted dark as a pupil. A scrap of paper lay curled under the lip of a blotter, edges browned, ink bled into the fibers. Do not let them dig. Eli set his palm on the desk to steady himself, and the wood answered with a hollow thud from somewhere below, a dull, belly-deep sound that didn't belong to furniture. Patch froze, head tilted, ears tucked. The wind paused. The schoolhouse waited. He lifted his hand. The thud did not return, but the feeling did, that a thing under his boots was listening. Eli Turner farmed land that had been in other men's names longer than it had been in his. A quilt of fields stitched by fences he never could afford to mend all at once. Every spring, his tractor rattled like a cough, and every fall, the debts weighed more than the grain. His house sagged into the earth at one corner, the way tired bodies sink into mattresses they stopped pretending to replace. It was a life of coffee you could almost see through, of hands nicked open by baling wire, of fix it later until later became a season. When he smiled, it showed mostly in his eyes. When he lied, it showed mostly to himself. He had a son once, had a wife once. The son left for work and promise, and the wife left for silence, and both departures made the same echo in the house. He talked to Patch more than he talked to any person. He prayed in short phrases while he walked his fence line at dusk, not because he thought God owed him answers, but because talking made the road shorter. When the county held its auction in front of the courthouse, and the lot labeled Old District School, Parcel 17B stalled, he raised his hand without a plan. No one countered. The gavel fell. Laughter shifted through the small crowd like straw in wind. 10 cents and a bad idea. That's where you come in. If stories like this, about hard soil, stranger sounds, and ordinary people pinned beneath something larger, speak to you, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know your weather, your road, your nearest horizon. This channel lives on folks who love a slow burn mystery with calloused hands at its center. Tonight we're going back to a schoolhouse that remembers more than it should. Stay with me, keep the lights on, and if you haven't yet, tap that bell, because the next time it rings in this story, it might not be the wind. So there Eli stood, a man who scraped the bottom of his coffee tin to make the morning stretch, holding a key that didn't need to exist because the door had long since given up. He set the key anyway on the teacher's desk. It looked small and earnest, like effort itself. Patch threaded between the desks, caught in loops of scents, mice, raccoon, old lunch pail metal, the dry almond of chalk. Eli's gaze kept sliding to the floor, to the place where the desk had sounded wrong. The boards were scabbed with nail heads, gray with years. He knelt and tapped, hollow. He tapped again, and felt the tap answered. That was the first moment he felt afraid. Eli fetched his pry bar and eased it into the seam between two boards. The wood resisted like a held breath, then exhaled with a creak and lifted. Below lay a layer of newer planks, grain tight and pale compared to the gray above, cut precise, fitted careful. Someone had sealed something in. He slid the bar left, levered another board. Patch paced, tail stiff as if the air itself had thickened. Thunder walked closer. Rain ticked once, then again on the windows, each drop making a tongue of dust rise from the sill. He found a ring screwed into one of the new boards blackened by time. He wrapped his fingers around it and pulled. The panel came up on hidden hinges with a sorrowful groan. Cold air breathed out of the dark, wet and mineral, like a cellar that had swallowed a storm hole. A narrow stair of rough-cut treads fell away beneath the classroom, angled toward a space the light could not reach. A smell rose that he could not name at first. Paper aged to leather, camphor, a twist of iron, and something medicinal. Patch backed away and whined, a sound Eli had only heard during lightning. He took his phone's light and leaned in. The beam cut a tight gash through dust that hung like fog. At the bottom, he saw the square edge of a trunk and the pale ribs of shelves. He also saw the curve of glass jars lined up like pupils, each capped with a brush of cloth held by twine. Beneath the cloth, wax had been poured to seal. On the nearest jar, letters floated in the beam, handwritten on paper coiled inside. Grade 4, February 1937. Attendance and notes. Records, he said, and the word sounded too small. His boot found the first step. It held. He descended, careful, feeling the way with his light in his free hand. The air cooled the sweat in the notch of his spine. Water dripped somewhere slow and regular. Tink, tink, a clock that had learned a new job. He reached the ground and found packed earth smoothed by shoes. Many shoes, many times. The shelves were rough but intentional, built with the kind of attention that needs a reason. The jars stared back at him. Each held pages rolled tight, sealed against the world. Some were labeled minutes, some letters sent, some discipline. Others had names. Miss Whitlow's journal, 1935-1939. Mr. Harrow's ledger, private. His light picked up a crate pushed under the bottom shelf. Stenciled across it, state exam files, do not remove. The lid was nailed. He ran his fingers over the heads, counted them like rosary beads. He set the phone on the crate to free both hands and pried. Nails squealed. The lid lifted. Inside, not papers, but a row of small cloth sacks tied with ribbon. He lifted one, heavier than it looked. He loosened the knot and spilled the contents into his palm. Coins fell with the soft clap of old metal, gold, dull under dust. He stopped breathing for a second. The face on the nearest coin stared up at him with the indifferent calm of history. Patch whined again. Eli's beam jumped as his hand shook, slid to the back wall, found a different color of earth, a pallet of bricks mortared with something darker than lime. He stepped forward and swept the beam. A mark had been carved into the mortar, a small, careful X, and beneath it, letters that made his mouth go dry. For the day they come. They who? He whispered. The schoolhouse above creaked as wind leaned on it. The bell shivered very lightly in its throat. Eli looked down at the coins. They were not many. They were enough. Enough to bleed his debts white. Enough to make a chicken coop out of new wood that smelled like rain. Enough to wrinkle a mean banker's mouth. But the jars, the journals, the phrase carved in brick, those were not money. They were purpose. When he climbed back up with one jar and one journal in his arms, the rain had committed. It hammered the roof so hard that dust leapt from rafters like startled moths. He set the things on the teacher's desk and peeled the wax carefully from the jar, working his knife under the seal. The cloth came free. The paper inside slid out into his hand. On the first page, a neat script marched with teacherly patience. To whomever is forced to choose, the truth is heavier than gold, but it buys more years. That night, he did not sleep at home. He sat in the schoolhouse with Patch at his feet, and a lantern casting slow ovals on the walls. Wind drew lines in the grass outside. He read Miss Whitlow's journal until his eyes burned. He learned about odd visitors who came before dawn to speak to the headmaster. He learned about extra exam papers that arrived already marked, about children of certain families who passed when they could scarcely read, and others, sharp, hungry, poor, who failed in ways that made their teachers ashamed. He learned about a fund the teachers built in secret from their own meager pay, slipped to mothers for shoes, to fathers for coal. He learned about a night in March of 1937 when the teachers met here in whispers with a county inspector who never made it back to town. On the last page, Miss Whitlow's handwriting tilted with fatigue. We hide what we have learned because we cannot trust those who take oaths and break them. If you find this, let it out when the hunger is most. And beware the men who still collect. Eli set the journal down. The school bell's shadow lay like a noose across the floor. The next morning, the hunger came wearing cologne. Caleb Rourke arrived in a truck that pretended to be muddy, and a suit that was not. He was one of those men who shook your hand while measuring your kitchen with his eyes. His family had owned grain and men for long enough that folks said Rourke as if it rhymed with weather. He smiled beneath sunglasses and showed Eli a card that said Rourke Development and Heritage Restoration, in letters that did not blink. "Congratulations," Caleb said, casting a look over the schoolhouse that turned ruin into opportunity. 10 cents. How about we multiply that by 1,000, quick clean profit for you, friend. Not selling, Eli said. Patch stood and placed himself in the doorway, tail a plain line. Is that right? Sentimental attachment? Caleb moved inside as if walls stepped aside for him. His shoes made a city sound on the boards. Historic site like this, you'll need permits if you plan to do any work. Safety codes, liability. It's a lot of headache. I'm in the business of aspirin. What business you in, really? Eli asked. His voice had a gravel he didn't put there. Caleb took off his sunglasses and cleaned a lens with a monogrammed cloth. His eyes were pale and comfortable. Making sure the right stories get told, he said, and the wrong ones stay put. His smile didn't move. He walked to the teacher's desk. His fingers lifted the journal before Eli could get there. He turned a page with the care one might give a bird's wing that you plan to break later. Now this is interesting, he said softly. Schoolhouse archaeology. Put that down, Eli said, closer than a second ago. Caleb did not put it down. He turned another page. His pale eyes sharpened. You opened something under the floor. It was not a question. Eli didn't answer. The bell above them gave a faint chime as wind probed the tower. Caleb's smile deserted him. The room reflexively learned his mood. You know why that school closed? Caleb asked. Because it wasn't needed anymore. Consolidation. Efficiency. People like to romanticize the past. They ignore that it was small and mean and inconvenient. Best let sleeping rooms lie. He opened his jacket just enough for Eli to see the shape of a holster where a gun should be but wasn't. It held a leather-bound planner instead. Caleb tapped it. Everything important gets recorded, he said, including liens. He offered again to buy, a number so large it made Eli see his house with a new roof and a freezer that wasn't a threat. Eli heard his own voice say no. Caleb's mouth moved, but his eyes did the real speaking. I'll be back. When he left, the room felt warmer, like breath you hadn't realized you were holding released. Eli read more. He opened the other jars. Some were minutes from meetings where teachers argued whether to speak or to hide. Some were letters addressed to newspapers that were never sent, milky with unsent courage. Some were receipts that showed money moved out of pockets that did not have it. Beneath the brick marked with an X, he found a rusted metal box with a lock he did not break so much as convince. Inside lay photographs. The inspector with a thin mustache, the teachers in winter coats, a small group standing by the schoolhouse at night, a flash catching eyes like animals. There was also a ledger written in a different hand than Miss Whitlow's, an accountant's hard paw. Payments listed beside names that Eli knew even now. Rourke, Hale, Matson. Beside each, amounts, dates, phrases like extra assistance, civic coordination, exam warehousing. At the bottom of one page, a line that felt like a key found under a mat. Collections continue annually, adjusted for inflation. He felt an old anger crack open in him, a geode that had waited years, not just for himself, for boys who fixed engines better than they read, and girls who read better than anyone, but both were told there wasn't a place for them, for the way a town can be stacked like cards and you never know until wind takes one how many lean on it. That afternoon, 2 county men drove up in a white pickup with a light bar on top and boots that met requirements. Their badges were clean enough to reflect questions back at you. Deputy Mason Hale did most of the talking. We got a report of trespassing, he said, peering past Eli into the schoolhouse without moving his boots from the step. Someone's been in the old building. I own it, Eli said. You do now, Hale replied. But there are codes. Be a shame if a fire broke out. These old places go up like a church on Easter. He smiled with his lip, not his eyes. On his forearm, ink crept from under his sleeve. A wolf's head, poorly done. His partner wrote down Eli's driver's license number like he was practicing. Eli didn't sleep the second night either. He stacked the jars and journals in the bed of his truck under a tarp and parked with the rear bumper backed into his barn so no one could see. He called the only person he knew who might know what to do with more truth than money, a local reporter named June Hart, who kept a desk at the River County Clarion and a spine that made people remember their manners. She answered on the third ring with the voice of someone who did not consider weekends an excuse for ignorance. "June," he said. "It's Eli Turner. I found something. I don't know what it is yet, but it's big." "Eli Turner with the leaning porch," she said, sifting through her mental index. "You don't call unless it matters. Where are you?" He told her. She listened with the kind of quiet that isn't passive. When he finished, she said only, "Don't move anything else. And don't talk to anyone else. I'll be there at dawn." Dawn came gray and raw. June arrived with a camera older than her car and a thermos that smelled like proper coffee. She wore boots that had known honest dirt. She moved in the schoolhouse like a person who trusts floors until they prove untrustworthy. Patch accepted her after she fed him a piece of jerky from her pocket without asking permission. Eli showed her the cellar, the jars, the ledger, the coins. She photographed everything with a care that felt like prayer. "They'll come for this," she said, not looking up from the ledger. "Not the coins, the narrative. Men who profited from a rigged game don't switch teams in overtime. They already came," he said, and told her about Caleb Rourke, about Deputy Hale's smile. June's jaw worked once, a muscle deciding between anger and caution. "Then we move faster." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small scanner, the kind that eats pages and spits light. "We make copies. Redundancy is insurance." By noon they had scanned most of the ledger and half of Miss Whitlow's journal. Eli kept thinking of the carved words, "For the day they come." Every small sound pried at his nerves. A branch scratching glass, a truck downshifting on the highway. When the quiet finally broke, it did so with purpose. Tires on gravel, doors shutting, men's voices. June's eyes met Eli's. "We don't run," she said. "We document." Patch stood, hackles lifted, a ripple of bristle down his back. Caleb Rourke didn't knock. He stepped into the doorway with Deputy Hale on one side and a man in a county fire marshal jacket on the other, a trinity of authority stitched from different cloth. Rain had stopped, but the sky still wore the color of wet iron. Caleb's sunglasses were back on, a small weather system of their own. "Afternoon," he said brightly. "Doing some restorative work? Can't have civilians around hazardous materials, old varnishes, asbestos, mold, very bad for the lungs." "Marshal?" He gestured, and the man in the jacket nodded, prepared to find whatever he'd been told to find. June stepped forward with her press badge. "June Hart, Clarion. Are you aware this is now a protected archive under state historical statutes?" She made it sound like both question and conclusion. Caleb smiled. "Charming?" Deputy Hale shifted his weight. Boards complained under his heel. "We'll need to inspect the premises," he said, moving toward the teacher's desk where the scanner sat like a confession. Eli shifted to block him. Hale placed his palm on Eli's chest and pressed in a way that could be called friendly in court. "Careful," June said. "You're on camera." She lifted her phone half an inch. Lens recording. Red dot stubborn. Caleb's smile did not falter. "The camera won't help you when this place burns," he said softly. "Just for Eli." Then louder. "Marshal, check the basement, old wiring." Eli's heart knocked once, hard, as the marshal found the open hatch and the stair beyond. Patch growled, the sound low and useful. Eli moved first, because sometimes the only way to keep something is to put your body between it and the world. He stepped onto the first tread down, then the second, palms out like a referee. The marshal placed a foot on the stair behind him. The stair answered with a splintery crack. The whole room seemed to lean. "Stop," Eli said. "You're overweighting the rest of his sentence hid under the explosion of sound when a back window blew inward. Not a bomb. A brick. It crossed the room, spun once, and struck the chalkboard, dropping to the floor in a cascade of old green dust. The room sucked in a breath, then a smell arrived on that breath. Gasoline, bright and mean. A rag burned in the window frame, orange licking at old dry wood. "Outside," Hale barked, weapon out, not for a person but for an excuse. He shoved past Eli hard enough to spill him onto one knee. June grabbed the scanner with one hand and the ledger with the other. Caleb moved toward the door, then paused and turned, as if to pick up the journal, as if it were an afterthought. Eli saw the angle of his fingers and understood. He'd known about the cellar long before today. Men like him always knew. Fire learns fast. It moved along the window frame like a rumor finding eager ears, then climbed the old curtain brittle as paper. Heat snapped. Smoke dropped to knee height and began to rise, kissing the boards like an undertaker. The bell in the tower shivered, then rang once, a clean, shocked sound that made the hair on Eli's arm stand up. "Help me," June said. She had the ledger under her shirt now, pressed to her stomach, hands free to grasp the trunk they hadn't opened yet. Eli grabbed the other handle. It was heavier than it should have been, as if time had settled into it. They moved it toward the hatch. Caleb stepped in, smooth as a thought, and blocked them. "That belongs to the county," he said lightly. The fire's reflection flickered in his lenses, tiny, good-natured flames. "Move," Eli said. "Or what? You'll hit me with history?" He reached for the trunk. Patch launched. He hit Caleb's arm with a speed that belonged to a different animal, teeth finding the meat of a man who believed in purchase more than in pain. Caleb swore and backhanded the dog, but Patch didn't let go. Hale moved in, gun up, and the gun's muzzle made a tight black period in the air that wanted to end a sentence. "Don't," June said, and the word carried a film of steel. "You pull that trigger in a public building on camera in a town that already doesn't trust your name, and your pension retires early." Hale froze, half a breath, just long enough for the fire to choose its path. Flame found the old stage curtain and raced along its bottom edge. The bell rang again, louder, a voice from a throat full of smoke. The marshal, coughing, called from the window, "The side door's jammed. We have to go out the front." "Basement," Eli said to June. He kicked the hatch all the way open. Cool air breathed up as if the earth offered a last favor. They muscled the trunk to the lip and tipped it. It slid, thumped, landed upright with the shudder of a heart that resumes. Eli grabbed 2 jars and the journal and dropped them after. Caleb, clutching his bleeding forearm, made his choice. He lunged toward the ledger under June's shirt. Eli met him halfway. Bodies and old stories collided. He didn't swing so much as shove, an agricultural motion the way you push a hay bale into place. It took Caleb off balance. He staggered. His heel found the open hatch. For one clear, terrible instant, Eli saw 2 futures, Caleb tumbling down and breaking like furniture, or Caleb regaining his footing and breaking everything that wasn't nailed down. The schoolhouse decided. A beam in the ceiling, loosened by heat, fell with the sound of a log thrown on a fire. It struck the floor between them and sent up a chorus of splinters. Caleb fell backward but caught the lip, muscles in his forearms drawing lines under skin. Patch, blood on his muzzle, leapt again, not to bite this time, but to grab the sleeve of Caleb's jacket and hold. For a beat, man and dog kept the world from choosing. "Give me the ledger," Caleb grunted. Smoke pooled around his chin. "Let go of my dog," Eli said. June dropped to a knee, palms black with soot, and slid the ledger free from her shirt. She did not hand it to Caleb. She tossed it into the cellar. It thumped into the trunk. "History goes first," she said, and the line would read braver later, but right now it felt like triage. The bell rang a 3rd time, insistent. The tower coughed a plume of sparks. The fire marshal shouted something about roofs and minutes that wasn't a comfort. Hale holstered his weapon with a curse and shouldered past, grabbing Caleb's collar with one hand and yanking. Patch let go at the same time and stumbled back, coughing, belly low. Caleb came up, eyes watering, hate clear. He spit blood on the boards near Eli's boot and smiled a look that said, "We're not done." They weren't. "Go," June said to Eli. "Down. I'll be right behind you with the rest." Her voice was the calm you get after deciding. Eli put one foot on the first step into the cellar and felt the stair complain. He went anyway. Coolness wrapped him like a wet shirt. He found the trunk, threw open its lid, and began filling it with what mattered. Jars, journals, the ledger, photographs, coin sacks last because you can't spend truth in a fire. Above, the schoolhouse changed languages. It spoke now in cracks and falls, in lines of flame searching for ways to run. He felt rather than saw June on the stair, then beside him, soot on her face like war paint. They lifted the trunk together. It was a coffin to carry. The stair groaned as they climbed. The hatch brightened to the color of oranges. When they emerged, the front half of the room was a geography of fire. The door was a square of white heat they could not touch. The back windows were mouths full of smoke. The bell pulled one last time, and then was silent, as if the rope had burned through. "Side door," June coughed. "Through the cloakroom." Eli nodded. They shouldered the trunk, Patch at their heels. Cloaks that had not known shoulders in decades hung like strips of night. The side door was jammed, as the marshal had said. Paint and heat fused. Eli set the trunk down, put his shoulder to the wood and pushed. It held until it didn't. It gave with a sound like bark torn from a tree. Cold air invaded. They stumbled out into a yard full of people who had come to watch either a rescue or a ruin, and were not sure which one to clap for. Fire trucks arrived late enough to be explained. Hale stood with Caleb, both of them with stories already arranging themselves behind their teeth. June set the trunk on the grass and turned her camera back on. Lens steady. "Smile," she said to Caleb. "You're part of the record now." The schoolhouse did not survive the afternoon. It collapsed inward with the exhausted grace of old things. The bell fell through fire and hit the floor beneath where children had recited and where secrets had been kept. When the smoke thinned to a dirty veil, the town saw what had been exposed. A cellar opening on the yard like a mouth that had finally formed the right word. In that word, there were names. June ran the story in the Clarion, and then on a site with more teeth than paper. Photographs of ledgers and journals leaned against photographs of men's faces who were used to being on the ribbon-cutting page, not the reckoning one. Miss Whitlow's sentences, patient and tired, brave where it hurt, moved through the county like rain through a dry summer field. People who had thought their lives were small learned that small lives had been arranged around them on purpose. Parents asked questions at school board meetings without apologizing for volume. Teachers stood a little straighter, grief and pride sharing a cup. Caleb Rourke filed suit, of course. He hired lawyers who wore their watches dialed down like gamblers. He claimed trespass, slander, defamation, endangerment. He stood on courthouse steps and arranged his face into sincerity. But the ledger did not entertain narratives. It tallied. The state attorney general's office read the numbers, and then read the names, and then made calls that changed the temperature of rooms. Deputy Hale discovered paperwork mattered after all. The fire marshal found himself explaining ignitable liquids to people who knew how to read lab reports. It took months, then more. But then it took. Eli Turner did not become rich exactly. The coins paid the liens with the state's permission and the town's blessing, because sometimes a community remembers who held the bucket when the house was burning. He replaced his roof. He bought a freezer that hummed like gratitude. He fixed his fence and found that the line of it straightened his back a little. He visited the new wing of the county library where Miss Whitlow's journal sat in a glass case, open to the sentence about truth and gold. On Sundays, when the church bell rang, he heard the school bell for a moment underneath it, a harmony of warnings that were also invitations. He walked the field behind where the schoolhouse had been and planted a stand of oaks that would outlive him. He named them in his head after the teachers whose names he had learned to pronounce like blessings. When the wind came from the west, you could hear the leaves talk. Patch grew grayer around the muzzle and more convinced of his own judgments. Sometimes, men at the diner tried to shake Eli's hand with eyes that wanted to be forgiven for laughter months earlier. He shook those hands, not because he forgot, but because he didn't intend to be the place where the story stopped moving. June kept the scanner on her desk. She liked to rest her palm on it when she was tired. The trunk found a home in the library, too. Its scars shone, its stubborn hinges celebrated. Children pressed their faces to the glass to see the old coins and the older photographs. They asked questions the way thirsty people drink. On the edge of town, where the prairie leans its shoulder against the sky, there is a square of wildflowers that grows where the school once stood. Bluestem and black-eyed Susans, a riot that doesn't ask permission. Eli walks there some evenings and tells the air about weather and tractors and the way the hawks are doing, the way you talk when you know there's a listener even if you can't see them. He does not ring bells. He does not need to. The wind knows its way around the old path. If stories like this, about ordinary hands holding extraordinary weight, mean something to you, stay. Click on another tale. The farmer and the lighthouse safe that would not open, or the hayfield prince that led a man home. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me your nearest horizon. Because sometimes a single voice reading in the dark is the rope that rings the bell we all need to hear.